War has come to Dominaria. The Brothers' War. Which is sad when you think of all the other more productive things those brothers could be doing. I mean, these guys could be starring in slapstick comedy films, acid trip video games, making critically acclaimed MTG Draft Guide videos on YouTube, or inventing flight. Although I guess this whole thing did start thanks to an ornithopter ride. Do you have what it takes to make your family proud on the battlefield? Now I know what you're thinking. I'm just a blue creature. I don't got what it takes to be a soldier. But that's the enemy talking. With some instruction from white, you too can join the battle. You can make a difference. You can win. Also, we ran out of black and red creatures to recruit, so we're lowering our standards. White-blue is go-wide soldier tribal. You may want to enlist if you find Siege Veteran, Skystrike Officer, Harbin, or Yoshin Tactician, all of which can turn your troops into powerful forces to be reckoned with. But before you can win the battle, you need an army. Ambush Paratrooper and Aeronaut Cavalry pump your other soldiers, Air Marshal gives them flying, Zephyr Sentinel provides protection, and Scrapwork Cohort or Mass Production give you all the bodies you'll ever need. In the Trenches is great in a go-wide deck, and Veteran's Power Blade turns every creature into a powerhouse at a cheap cost. A lot of these soldiers have flying, so you can play this as a flyers deck. If you do, you'll want to keep tempo by gumming up the ground with cards like Involuntary Cooldown, Deadly Riposte, or Coastal Bulwark. If you have a slower deck plan with more token production, Tocasia's Welcome or Symmetry Matrix are great ways to keep your cards flowing. And keep in mind that the soldier tokens are artifacts, so you can use them to power up Phalanx Vanguard, Warlord's Elite, or Thopter Architect. The best thing you can do in Limited is to draw more cards. And Blue-Black takes this to heart with several cards that want you to draw 2 or more cards per turn. Lotnom Adept, Thopter Mechanic, and Gurgling Anointer get bigger, Gixian Puppeteer drains your opponent's life, Trench Stalker gains Death Touch and Lifelink, and Evangel of Synthesis gains Menace. Now, in order to make this work, you need to have ways to draw extra cards, and there is no shortage. Take Flight, Urza Powerstone Prodigy, Teferi, Gix, and Thraxidemon can all let you draw an extra card every single turn. There are also cantrips like Combat Courier, Scrapwork Rager, Curate, Mightstone's Animation, Moment of Defiance, and Energy Refractor. All of these let you trigger your payoffs during your own turn. But Stern Lesson and Third Path Savant expand your range by letting you trigger these abilities during your opponent's turn. Clearly, this is a late-game control deck, so feel free to take advantage of Power Stones to help your ramp, counterspells to keep your opponents at bay, and splash some bombs if you aren't leaning too heavily into Power Stones and artifacts. Any war is won by great sacrifice. Black-Red loves war, if you get what I'm saying. I'm saying that they also love sacrifice. Ashnod lets you sacrifice creatures to create Power Stones, then use those Power Stones to make 3/3 zombies. Diabolic Intent turns a creature into a tutor. Killzone Acrobat takes to the skies. Power Stone Fracture's an extremely efficient kill spell. Thraxidemon keeps your hand stocked. Pendragon Strongbow grows big and throws damage at the opponent. Transmogrant Altar gives you mana or 3/3s, and Junkyard Genius pumps your board. But not himself, so be careful with that. You're gonna need to make sure you have a lot of fuel for the fire. Good creatures to sacrifice include Gnawing Vermin, Conscripted Infantry, and whatever creature you stole with Sibling Rivalry. Power Stones are your main source of disposable artifacts. You can get these from Gix's Caress, Horn Stoneseeker, Sligstone Refinery, or Hall of Tagsin. But your best bet are cards that are both artifacts and creatures because they can be sacrificed to whatever you want. Now this deck tends to be very aggressive. You want a lot of small creatures that can get in for damage and then be sacrificed once they're no longer useful. Gixian Infiltrator and Goblin Blast Runner are great choices because they come down early and hit hard whenever you sacrifice any permanent, even Evolving Wilds. While Black-Red likes to sacrifice their Power Stones, Red-Green wants to use them to snowball into massive artifact creatures. And there are a lot, so don't be too picky. If you open a sweet 9-drop like Portal to Phyrexia, this is a good place to be. So your goal in the early game should be to play cards that trade off with the opponent's cards while leaving you with a Power Stone. Things like Excavation Explosion, Argothian Opportunist, Arbalist Engineers, Stone Retrieval Unit, and Thran Spider. Phylogeny Excavation can also get you there if you're willing to take a turn off to cast it. Now, while you're accruing a Dragon's Hoard worth of Power Stones, artifact payoffs like Perimeter Patrol, Seventh Steelseeker, and Teething Wormlet help you stay ahead of the opponent. If you're getting impatient waiting to play your massive artifact spells, you could also cheat them into play with Arms Race or Over the Top. And once you do have a kaiju on your side of the field, you can surprise your opponent with haste thanks to Bitter Reunion, or use Pyrrhic Blast to hit them directly. Other great ways to spend your Power Stone mana include Draconic Destiny, Alloy Animist, Argothian Sprite, and Awaken the Woods. It's important to make sure that you have meaningful plays even before you get up to your 9-drops, or you may never get there at all. Now I'm going to let Green-Blue cut the line here because it's basically the same strategy as Red-Green. You're still trying to ramp with those massive artifacts, but you do have a couple new great options, like one with the Multiverse or Drafna, founder of Latnam. The main difference here is that with Battery Bearer, all of your creatures can become Power Stones. This, combined with Blue-Green's ability to stall the board, may mean that you're less inclined to focus on creating Power Stone tokens and more focused on playing a slow game. Urza Power Stone Prodigy, Coastal Bulwark, Surge Engine, Blanchwood Prowler, and Obstinate Baloth are good options to stave off attacks and accrue value. Your removal won't be as good as Red-Green's, so try to save your Desynchronizes and Weakstone's Subjugations for creatures that you can't beat in combat. While Excess and Materialism tends to be Black's domain, this set decided to switch it up. Like most color pairs in the set, Green-White is also in love with artifacts. It doesn't even care what they do. Phalanx Vanguard, Thopter Architect, Perimeter Patrol, Sereth Steelseeker, Teething Wormlet, and Yoshin Dissident just all want you to keep buying them the next new toy. While you could use Power Stones to accomplish this goal, this deck is more mid-range than late game and would rather spend its time playing creatures that impact the board now. Unearthed creatures like Scrapwork Cohort, Yoshin Frontliner, Simian Simulacrum, and Reconstructed Thopter are great for this, because they give you the stats now and an extra artifact fall trigger later. Goblin Firebomb, Liberator, and Supply Drop have extra utility in this deck, allowing you to trigger all of these abilities at instant speed. Remember, whoever dies with the most toys didn't build a very good deck. How do you lose with that much advantage? Non-creature spells may not be an original theme, but hey, I'm happy with anything that lets us have Monastery Swift Spear again. Other payoffs for this theme include Hercule, Wing Commando, Dwarven Forge Chanter, Third Path Iconoclast, and Levitating Statue. And that's about it. This is not a massive theme. That said, it doesn't have to be, because the few cards that there are reward you for playing excellent cards in your deck, which you'll want to do anyway. Counterspells like Defabricate, Scatter Ray, or Urza's Rebuff, and removal spells like Weakstone's Subjugation, Excavation Explosion, or Obliterating Bolt are gonna be good in just about any deck that can play them, so why not get paid off while you do it? This will play like a typical counterburn strategy. Get in damage while it's safe, then use your spells to create openings and throw in a bit more damage. For this reason, Mishra's Domination, Unleash Shell, and Whirling Strike get better in this deck, and Mechanized Warfare can be a great build-around if you don't have many blue creatures. Now, other good aggressive creatures include Zephyr Sentinel, Feldon, and Giant Cindermaw. Anything efficient or evasive is what you're looking for. Do you love reanimating creatures? Who doesn't? Taking them straight from the graveyard and cheating them into play, it just feels great. And as we all know, the best reanimation targets are the ones that cost 3 mana or less. I mean, just ask Recommission, Gixian Puppeteer, No One Left Behind, or Hero of the Dunes. Of course, you're gonna need some bodies. Airlift Chaplain and Gnawing Vermin stock your graveyard, Recruitment Officer stocks your hand, Warlord's Elite hits above its pay grade, Power Stone Engineer leaves a mana rock behind each time it dies, and Survivor of Corliss doesn't even need to hit the field to smooth your draws. You can also use unearthed creatures like Yoshin Frontliner, Ashnod's Harvester, or Reconstructed Thopter to trigger cards like Takazia's Welcome, Thran Vigil, or Dredging Claw. Now this deck is a mid-range value engine. Don't be afraid to trade off your creatures. You can always get them back. Just remember to focus on creatures that give you bonuses whenever they enter the battlefield or die. Eventually, the accrued value will allow you to walk to the finish line while your opponent watches, empty-handed. Like White-Black, Green-Black is focused on filling its graveyards with creatures. Unlike White-Black, it's happy to leave them alone once they're there. Gixian Skullflare and Gnarlroot Pallbearer get buffed. Gaia's Courser draws cards, Deathbloom Ritualist ramps you, Battlefield Butcher drains your opponent, Skyfisher Spider gains you life, and Overwhelming Remorse's cost becomes a lot more whelming. Now don't get me wrong, Black still has plenty of ways to capitalize on removing creatures from your graveyard, and if you find some good ones, more power to you. But you want to focus on keeping probably around 3 creatures in your graveyard at all times. Disciples of Gix accomplishes this all by itself, assuming you have 3 artifact creatures. Obviously, unearthed cards are a great target here. Mill is also a good way to stock your graveyard. Blanchwood Prowler, Burrowing Razormaw, and Ravenous Gigamole do the trick. Wasteful Harvest can work too, but you only have so many slots for cards that aren't creatures. Now this deck is trying to slog its way to victory by gumming up the board and draining its opponent through a board stall, so feel free to pick cards that grant you advantage over time. Painful Quandary, Transmogrant's Crown, Fauna Shaman, and even the Assembly Worker trio can get you there. As ever, Red-White is a pretty straightforward aggressive creature-based strategy. Falaji Vanguard is the main feature here, and man is this card good, provided you have creatures already on the field and more creatures on the way. Let's make that happen. Start the aggression on turn 1 with Recruitment Officer, Survivor of Corliss, or Yoshin Frontliner. Win combat with Loran's Escape, Military Discipline, or Whirling Strike. Then keep dropping aggressive creatures, Autonomous Assembler, Horned Stoneseeker, Steel Seraph, Giant Cindermaw, and Blitz Automaton. Double strikers like Combat Thresher and Falaji Chain Dancer are also great threats if you can buff their power with Aeronaut's Wings, Veteran's Power Blade, or Thran Power Suit. Now, aggro decks tend to be vulnerable to Mana Flood, so Bitter Reunion, Mishra Excavation Prodigy, Scrapwork Mutt, or Queen Kayla Bin Krug all allow you to smooth your draws while maintaining some level of aggression. Lastly, aggro decks need reach, some way to close out the game after the enemy has stabilized. Ambush Paratrooper or Sibling Rivalry are good cards for this, but you also have the built-in option of using the big version of your prototype creatures. In addition to the major archetypes, there are always a few build-arounds that take you in a different direction. Fateful Handoff has the potential to draw 10 cards, but how do we abuse it without giving our opponent something we'll regret later? The easiest thing to give away is something that costs a lot because of its ETB effect, which the opponent won't be getting. Great Desert Prospector, Skitterbeam Battalion, Blade Coil Serpent, and the Mightstone and Weakstone are good options. Alternatively, a large permanent with a cheap unearth cost is great because your opponent won't get to keep the permanent in question. Teresian Mindbreaker, Scrapwork Cohort, Perennial Behemoth, or any artifact while you have Mishra Tamer of Makfawa on the field. Lastly, you could just give away a huge artifact creature like Depth Charge Colossus, then hope that one of the 9 cards you draw is a removal spell, probably a bounce spell. Of course, you already have a 9-drop on the field, so you may not have many cards left in your library. It's a clunky thing to try to make work, so Fateful Handoff is probably not really worth running, but if the stars align, I'm gonna try it. Tawnos the Toy Maker copies all of your bird and beast spells for free. Unfortunately, you don't have a ton of options. In green-blue, your choices are Burrowing Razormaw, Obstinate Baloth, Koilos Rock, and Perennial Behemoth. Now, if you're able to make this work, it will be powerful, but just don't first pick Tawnos and expect it to happen. It's not gonna happen. Finally, I'd like to talk about the best commons in each color, just looking at the cards in a vacuum. This is helpful when you're not sure where your deck is heading, so you can just choose one of the generically best cards in your color. White's number 3 common is Loran's Escape. Man, what is with these protection spells that show a character protecting an important artifact, even though right afterwards said artifact falls into the hands of the bad guy? It just feels wrong. Anyhow, this card is good because when you spend 10 mana to cast a creature, it's a lot easier to spend 1 mana to keep it alive than to go buy a new one. Number 2 is Disenchant because, come on, it's cheap, instant, and destroys half the non-land permanents in the format. And to nobody's surprise, Prison Sentence is number 1. Arrests tend to be great, and this one even smooths out your next turn. Just be careful using it against a black-red deck because they have ways to sacrifice their creatures for value. Moving on to blue. In a world of massive ground-based bodies, Wing Commando is in a great position to sneak in a lot of damage while your spells keep opposing threats in check. Speaking of massive threats, Desynchronize is a great option for removing them in a way that dodges Graveyard Recursion. And Weakstone's Subjugation comes in at number 1, as in, 1 mana is a very cheap cost to deal with the massive bodies you're going to come across in this set. And you can even kick it if you need to tap the creature down first. For black, Scrapwork Rager is a little expensive, but it does everything you want it to do. Draws you cards, trades off while accruing advantage, and is decent sacrifice fodder. Number 2 is Gixian's Skullflayer. It may look unassuming, but this is a late-game inevitability engine. Don't underestimate it. And Overwhelming Remorse deals with any problem permanently. That's important in a format with so many ways to recur creatures. And moving on to red, Rock Hunter is just an aggressively statted creature, which red loves. It even has the ability to block one of white-blue's pesky flyers if you need. Scrapwork Mutt is aggressive enough for the faster red decks, and smooths your draws, which every red deck appreciates. And number 1 is Excavation Explosion. It's decent removal, and it gives you a Power Stone, which is useful in a variety of red strategies. You can't go wrong picking up as many of these as possible. And lastly, green. Hoarding Recluse is the ultimate in defensive ability, able to block and kill almost any creature, no matter its size. This should allow you to stall until you get to your late game. On top of that, when it does trade off, you can either put one of your powerful cards back in your deck, or deny the opponent an unearth card from their graveyard. Number 2 is Boulder Branch Golem. Now, neither half of this card is particularly impressive, but what's important is the versatility. It can be a playable creature in either the mid-game or late game, and in both circumstances, it stabilizes you against evasive or aggressive decks. Number 1 is Argothian Opportunist. This creature is just a solid body that trades off while leaving you more mana to work with, and that is all green wants. And as always, don't be afraid to spend a pick on Evolving Wilds. Almost every deck benefits from improving its mana consistency at the low cost of 1 mana. This video may be over, but the war is just beginning. The set looks like a super fun draft environment, with all of the archetypes having a good deal of overlap that gives the format replayability. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like, and if you want to see more draft guides like this one in the future, remember to subscribe.